Christmas had always been my favorite time of year. The twinkling lights, the smell of cinnamon and pine, the laughter around a full table. Those were the things that stitched a life together. At least they used to, before that year. Before everything unraveled. I was 74, living in a quiet coastal town called Ashbury Bay. My house, a modest, clapboard cottage by the sea, held decades of memories. The echo of my husband's laughter, the rhythm of piano keys he once played, the scent of the gardenias he planted just outside the porch. I never needed more than that. I had my peace, my memories, and my 2 cats, Oliver and May. But that year, for the first time in a long while, I was excited to spend the holidays with my son, Mark, and his wife, Tessa. Mark had called a few weeks earlier and said, "Tessa's family is hosting Christmas at their place this year. You should come." I had been surprised, but touched. Tessa came from money, and while she never said it aloud, I always got the feeling she thought I was beneath her, a relic from a simpler, less polished world. But still, I thought maybe things were changing. Maybe this Christmas would be different. Wrapped a tin of my best gingerbread cookies in red cellophane, tied it with twine, and even bought a new winter coat for the occasion, something warm and cranberry-colored. It made me feel included, wanted. But then came the call. It was 2 days before Christmas. Mark's voice on the phone was quieter than usual. "Hey, Mom. Tessa wanted to talk to you." There was a shuffle, and then her voice came on. Cool, sharp, like ice water in a crystal glass. "Helen," she began. Her tone clipped, polite in the way a doctor delivers a terminal diagnosis. "I wanted to talk to you before you came all the way out here. I think it's better if you sit this one out." I blinked. "I don't understand," she sighed, as if she were explaining something obvious to a child. "You don't really fit in with my family, Helen. They're different. It's not personal, it's just you're more traditional. And honestly, it's going to be a little formal. It's just not the right setting for you." I sat down, the edge of the couch suddenly too far from the floor. "So you're saying I shouldn't come?" "I think it's for the best." There was a pause. Then Mark came back on the line. He didn't defend me, didn't push back. He just said quietly, "Tessa thinks it'll be easier this way." I tried to laugh, a soft, bitter thing, but it caught in my throat. "And what do you think, Mark?" Another pause. I think she's right, Mom. Maybe next year." Next year. The words landed like stones in my chest. He hung up not long after, and I sat there staring at the tin of cookies on the table, the ribbon still neatly tied. I didn't cry, not right away. Instead, I stood and unplugged the Christmas lights I'd strung around the window the week before. The silence in the house seemed to grow louder with each second. Even the cat seemed to understand something had shifted. That night, I made myself a cup of tea and turned off all the lamps. I watched the sea in the darkness beyond the porch. The waves had always calmed me. But not this time. This time they reminded me of how small I was. How easily forgotten. I thought of Mark as a little boy. The way he used to run through the halls with frosting on his nose. How he used to call me Mama when he was sick. How we used to sing carols at the piano, him slightly off-key, both of us laughing. And now he was a man who stood silently as his wife erased me from his life like an inconvenience. I was heartbroken, yes. But more than that, I was humiliated, cast aside by the people I loved most, and in the cruelest way, politely, with practiced smiles and the illusion of grace. The next morning, I awoke to the smell of cinnamon. I thought I was dreaming, but then I heard it. Laughter from the kitchen. I shuffled out of bed, still wearing the cardigan I had cried into the night before, and found 3 of my old friends bustling around like Christmas elves. Irene, Gloria, and June, women I had grown old with, laughed with, grieved with, women who knew me better than I sometimes knew myself. Irene said you'd been abandoned, Gloria said, opening the oven and pulling out a casserole. So we decided, hell, no, we're bringing Christmas to you. Tears welled up in my eyes, but this time they weren't from pain. You're all ridiculous, I whispered. Ridiculously loyal, Irene corrected, pressing a mug of mulled wine into my hands. We sat by the fire, the 4 of us, bundled in old shawls and soft slippers, laughing about the absurdity of growing old, of how invisible we became, not to each other, but to the world. And that's when I said it, not with bitterness, but with clarity. I wasn't invited. I was erased. And the moment I said it, something inside me clicked. A quiet decision beginning to stir. The morning after Christmas, the house was quiet again. My friends had gone home, their laughter now only a warm echo in the walls. I stood in the kitchen holding an empty mug, watching the steam curl from the sink as I rinsed the last of the dishes. The scent of cinnamon still lingered, faint and bittersweet. Outside, the sea rolled in slow and gray beneath a pewter sky. I could hear it, constant, dependable, like the heartbeat of this old place. Ashbury Bay wasn't much, just a small, coastal village with crooked picket fences, weather-worn porches, and people who said hello even when they didn't know your name. But it had been my world for over 40 years. My husband, Walter, and I had found this house by accident. We were just passing through on a drive when we saw the for sale sign crooked in the window. The place needed everything: paint, a new roof, a miracle, but Walt fell in love with it instantly. It's not much now, he'd said, wrapping his arm around my shoulder, but it could be ours. And it had been. We rebuilt it together, board by board, paycheck by paycheck. He fixed the plumbing, and I stitched curtains for every window. We had our fights, like anyone else. But we also had laughter. We had music. We had Mark. That house wasn't just where we lived. It was where we became who we were. For years, I told myself the house would belong to Mark when I was gone. It made sense. He was our only child. I had written him into my will after Walter passed, along with a few keepsakes and small accounts. The house was the crown jewel, the legacy of everything we'd built with love and labor. Mark would inherit it. That had always been the plan. But now, I wasn't sure. I stood in the study, the morning light catching dust motes in the air. The old cedar desk still held Walt's fountain pens in their tray, though none had been touched in years. I opened the drawer where I kept the will, neatly, folded, notarized, filed under H for Helen's Endgame, a joke I'd made to myself once. I pulled it out slowly, sat down, and read every word. There it was. Mark's name, printed in black ink, right above the clause that handed him all property and residence located at 14 Shoreline Drive, Ashbury Bay. I stared at that line for a long time. My eyes began to blur, not from tears, but from the weight of it. The weight of every Christmas past, every birthday cake, every scraped knee I'd kissed better, every sleepless night I'd spent worrying about him. He had been everything to me, and now he had stood by while his wife tossed me, out of their lives like expired milk. A knock on the front door startled me. I folded the paper, slid it back into the drawer, and went to open it. Irene and Gloria stood on the porch holding a bag of scones and 2 thermoses of coffee. "We figured you might need reinforcements," Gloria said with a wink. "I don't need coffee," I said. "I need to unwrite history." "Then it's a good thing we brought pens," Irene replied. We sat on the sun porch, wrapped in blankets, watching the waves through the misted glass. I told them everything. The old will, my hesitation, my guilt, my confusion, my anger. Don't want to be cruel, I said quietly. But I can't keep giving pieces of myself to people who only take. Irene set down her cup. Helen, that house is your life. You built it. You kept it going. Mark didn't lay a single tile in that kitchen. Tessa certainly didn't prune those roses. He doesn't deserve it, Gloria added. Not if he can't stand beside you when it matters. I thought. Leaving it to him was an act of love, I murmured. But love isn't supposed to be one-sided, is it? No, Irene said. It's not. I went back inside alone after they left, walked to the study, and opened the drawer again. This time my hands didn't shake. I took out the will, laid it flat on the desk, and reached for one of Walter's old pens. I pressed the tip to the page, right where Mark's name sat, bold and entitled, and then I crossed it out. A single, deliberate stroke. The sound of the nib scraping against paper was oddly satisfying, like finality, like breath after drowning. I didn't have a new plan yet. No revised will, no alternative heir. But in that moment, I knew something for certain. The house would not go to Mark. Not because I didn't love him. I did. Even now. But love isn't a blank check. It's not unconditional surrender. It's not giving your soul to someone who only sees your worth when it's convenient. The house was mine. Mine and Walter's. It was full of our ghosts, our joys, our ordinary days. It was not just an inheritance to be claimed. It was a life. And Mark had chosen to forget that. I folded the old will, now permanently marred by my decision, and placed it back in the drawer. Later that evening, I stood on the porch with a cup of tea, the tide rolling in under a silver sky. I felt lighter. Not quite free, but close. The cold wind didn't sting so badly anymore, and for the first time in a long time, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not hope. Control, and I wasn't going to give it up again. A few days after I crossed out Mark's name in the will, I finally began to feel like myself again. Or at least, like a version of myself I hadn't seen in years. I was waking up, earlier, walking along the shore with a clearer head, even playing the old records Walter had loved. The silence of my house no longer felt like punishment. It felt like a choice. But peace, I was quickly reminded, is always temporary when other people are invested in your silence. The call came mid-morning on a Wednesday. I had just settled into my reading chair with a fresh cup of tea when the phone rang. I didn't recognize the number at first. It wasn't saved in my contacts, but the voice on the other end was unmistakable. Helen, it's Thomas Farrow. My stomach tightened. Thomas had been my lawyer for over a decade. He'd handled Walter's estate, drafted my original will, and was one of the few men I thought I could still trust. He had always been polite, meticulous, and frankly, a little dull, which was exactly what I wanted in someone safeguarding my life's work. But that morning, his voice wasn't steady. It trembled faintly, like a man already second-guessing his next words. I think we need to review your estate documents, he said. There's been some activity. What kind of activity? I asked. A pause. Well, it's come to my attention that certain amendments may have been processed. Recent ones. Your son, Mark. He's been in touch. I sat bolt upright. Mark? Yes. He came by my office. More than once, actually. I could feel my pulse beginning to hammer in my chest. And what exactly did he say, Thomas? Another pause. Then, slowly, he insisted you'd had a change of heart, that you were overwhelmed, that you wanted the original will restored. He convinced me to reinstate him as beneficiary. I was quiet for a moment. The silence was thick, dense, dangerous. "Did you speak to me about any of this?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "No," he admitted. I took his word. He said you weren't feeling well, that you'd asked him to handle it for your sake. My hands began to tremble. I looked down at my tea, now cold in the cup. "And you believed him?" Thomas sighed. "He brought documentation, letters, notes. They looked legitimate." I stood up, clutching the phone. My voice was low, but furious. "How much did he offer you to forget I exist?" "Helen, please." "No, don't try to explain it now. You of all people knew what that house meant to me, and you let my son, my own son, walk into your office and rewrite my life because what? He had a key to my handwriting?" Thomas's voice grew more desperate. "I didn't mean any harm. I thought I was helping. I thought he was trying to protect you." I laughed, bitter and hollow. "Protect me? From what? My own autonomy?" There was a long silence. Thomas had no defense. And in that silence, something broke in me. Not just trust, not just disappointment, but the final thread of naivety that had kept me believing the people in my life still had my best interests at heart. "I'm done," I said quietly. "I'm done with you, and I'm done pretending this is anything other than betrayal." "Helen, wait." I hung up the phone. The silence in the house roared like a tide crashing through the walls. I stood there for a long time, staring at the floor, at the rug I had vacuumed just that morning, at the photo of Walter and me sitting on the mantel. His smile, full of life and loyalty, stared back at me. What would he have done? He would have driven to that lawyer's office himself and demanded justice. He would have reminded me that I wasn't small or helpless or someone to be walked over, and I heard his voice in my head now, clear as ever. Do something about it. I marched to the desk and pulled open the drawer. I took out the will, now violated, and shoved it into a folder. Then I gathered every document I had. The property deed, my bank statements, Walter's letters, even the notarized marriage certificate we'd framed but never hung. If Mark wanted a fight, I would give him one. But first, I needed a lawyer who didn't buckle at the first flash of a checkbook. I sat at my laptop, opened the browser, and searched. Estate lawyer near Ashbury Bay. Names appeared. Firms, Yelp reviews. Some were too flashy, others too vague. And then I found one that felt right. Logan Pierce, Eskin, specializing in elder law and estate protection, known for integrity. I stared at his profile picture, a younger man, late 30s maybe, with kind eyes and a direct gaze. Not the tired familiarity of Thomas Farrow. Not someone used to old money. Someone who looked like he gave a damn. I picked up the phone and dialed. A voice answered on the second ring. Logan Pierce's office. I drew a breath. Yes, my name is Helen Whitaker. I need legal help, and I need someone who's not afraid to go up against entitled children and compromised men. The assistant didn't even hesitate. We have availability tomorrow at 10. Would you like to come in? Yes, I said. I believe it's time someone took me seriously. When I hung up, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt exhausted. I sat back in the chair, folder in my lap, and let out a long breath. Mark had crossed a line, not just of decency but of blood. He had gone behind my back, rewritten my wishes, and used a man I trusted to do it. And all without ever calling me. Without even facing me like a son should. This wasn't about inheritance anymore. This was about control. This was about being seen. And I'd be damned if I let them erase me again. That night, I stood on the porch wrapped in Walter's old flannel jacket, The stars were faint, but steady. The ocean churned like always. You were right, I whispered to the wind. I waited too long to fight back. But I was fighting now. The next morning, I put on my best navy coat, the one Walter used to say made me look like I belonged in a courtroom drama, and drove to Logan Pierce's office in town. It was a modest building tucked between a dentist and a florist. Clean lines, no marble columns, no mahogany desks meant to intimidate. Just clear glass, sunlight, and the faint scent of fresh paper. Inside, a young receptionist greeted me by name. "Mr. Pierce will be right with you, Ms. Whitaker." I nodded, clutching my folder a little tighter. When Logan entered the room, I stood. He offered a firm handshake, his grip steady but not aggressive. "Helen, thank you for coming in." "Please, let's talk." His office was simple. A desk, 2 chairs, a small bookshelf lined with legal tomes and photos of his family. No pretense, no performance, just space to be heard. I handed him the folder. "My son tried to erase me," I said, "and my lawyer let him." Logan didn't flinch. He listened as I laid it all out. Tessa's cruelty, Mark's silence, Thomas's betrayal, the forged amendments, the crossed-out will. He read everything, pausing to make notes with a pen that clicked softly between his fingers. When I finished, he looked up, his expression calm but alert. "This is not only unethical," he said, "it's potentially criminal. Your original will was clear. The amendments your son submitted appear to be fraudulent, especially without your consent or presence. I want to fight," I told him. "But I don't want revenge. I want what's mine, my home, my voice, my rights." He nodded. "Then we'll fight the right way. Legally, cleanly, firmly." It was the first time in weeks I'd felt like someone was on my side, not out of obligation, but because it was the right side to be on. He slid a packet across the desk. "I'll file an immediate declaration of conflict regarding the will. We'll void any changes made under false pretenses, and begin the process of drafting a new one. Your son will be notified formally." I exhaled. "Then let him be notified." And he was. 3 days later, my phone rang again. I was folding laundry when I saw Mark's name flash across the screen. For a moment, I stared at it. A name I had once associated with everything soft and safe. Now, it might as well have been a storm warning. I picked up. "Hello?" "Mom," he said, his voice tight. "Why did I get a letter from a new lawyer saying you're contesting the will?" "Because I am," I said simply. "I don't understand. We already talked about this." "No," I said. "You talked. You decided. I wasn't involved." There was a pause. Then his tone sharpened. "You're leaving me no choice, Mom. If you keep pushing this, I'll take it to court." I closed my eyes for a beat, then opened them slowly, the towel in my hand forgotten. "You're threatening me now? I'm telling you," he said. "This isn't just about money. It's about family. It's about what's right." I felt a laugh rise in my throat, but it didn't make it past my lips. "What's right?" I repeated. "You think forging legal documents behind my back is right? I didn't forge anything," he snapped. "Thomas said it was fine." "Thomas is done," I said. "And so is this game you're playing." He lowered his voice, that calm, insidious tone he'd picked up from Tessa. "You're acting like this house means more to you than your son." "It does," I said softly. "Because the woman who lives in this house, who scrubbed its floors, buried her husband, and held on to her sanity while being disrespected by her own blood, she matters. And she's finally remembering that." There was silence on the other end. Then, cold and cutting. "Then I'll take it to court." I felt something inside me shift. Not fear, not anger, just resolve. "Then I'll see you there." And I hung up, The weeks that followed were filled with filings, notarizations, and more paperwork than I thought I'd ever handle in my lifetime. Logan was tireless. He reviewed every document I had, took careful depositions from me, and filed an official complaint against Thomas Farrow for misconduct. When we found inconsistencies in the forged amendments, dates that didn't match, signatures that looked copied, I saw the fire in Logan's eyes. "We're building a strong case," he said one morning, "and we'll be ready." Meanwhile, Mark went quiet. No calls, no letters, no olive branches, just silence. And still, I waited for the ache, the regret, the temptation to pick up the phone and say, "Forget it. Just take the house. Let's be family again." But it never came. Instead, I found peace in the smallest routines. Walking the shoreline at dawn, baking muffins I never ate, writing letters to Walter in a notebook I kept beside my bed, and every time I passed the piano, I ran my fingers along the closed lid, whispering, "We're still here." One morning, as I sat with Logan finalizing my new will, he asked gently, "What would you like to do with the house if not leave it to your son?" I looked out the window at the sea beyond town. "I don't know yet," I said. "But I do know this. It won't go to someone who tried to steal it." He smiled slightly. "A good answer. One you can live with." "Yes," I whispered. Finally. The day of the hearing dawned gray and cold, like the sky had bowed its head out of respect for what was coming. I woke early, earlier than I needed to, and sat at the edge of my bed listening to the hush of the sea beyond the house. My hands were steady, but there was a weight on my chest that no deep breath could lift. This wasn't just a legal hearing. This was a reckoning. By 9:30, I was seated in Logan Pierce's car, clutching a worn leather purse filled with documents, tissues, and a small photograph of Walter tucked in the inner pocket like a talisman. He was smiling in it, sun in his eyes, arms crossed, standing barefoot on the porch he built, plank by plank. The house behind him. Our home. "I've reviewed everything again," Logan said as we drove. "We're going in strong. Just speak. Your truth when it's time. You've got more power than you think." I nodded, too focused to speak. I didn't want to win out of pride. I wanted to win because what had been done to me was wrong. Not misunderstood. Not accidental. Wrong. We arrived at the courthouse just after 10. It was smaller than I'd imagined, with weathered brick and brass door handles that had been polished by decades of hands. Inside, the air was dry and formal, the kind of stillness that demanded silence. Mark and Tessa were already seated across the aisle. He wouldn't look at me. She didn't bother pretending. Her arms were folded, lips pressed in a smug little smile, like she already knew how this story ended. Let her smile. Because today, I was finally going to speak. The judge entered. A tall, silver-haired man with a gravelly voice and eyes that saw everything. The bailiff called us to order, and Logan stood. He presented our case with quiet authority. Calm, methodical. He laid out the timeline. The forged will, the secret visits to my former lawyer, the sudden amendments, and most damning of all, the lack of my knowledge or consent. Then came the moment I didn't expect. The court called Thomas Farrow. He walked in looking 10 years older than the last time I'd seen him. His tie was crooked. His hands shook slightly as he took the oath and sat in the witness chair. "I betrayed a client," he said plainly. "I was manipulated. I didn't verify the changes Mark Whitaker requested. I failed to call Helen. I failed to protect her rights." Mark flinched in his seat. Tessa whispered something sharp under her breath. "I've submitted a sworn statement," Thomas continued, "and I'm prepared to accept any professional consequences. But I need the court to understand that I've come forward now because it's the right thing to do, and because I owe Helen that much." Logan nodded to the judge. "Your Honor, we rest our case." The judge turned to me. "Mrs. Whitaker, would you like to say anything before I make my decision?" I rose slowly, my knees aching, but my back straight. "Yes," I said. And then I walked to the center of the courtroom, placed both hands gently on the wooden railing, and looked directly at the judge, and then at my son. "I didn't come here today to fight for bricks and wood," I began, my voice steady. "I came to fight for something far less tangible. My dignity, my place in this world, and my right not to be erased." Mark wouldn't meet my gaze, so I kept going. I was a good mother. I gave my son everything I had, my time, my love, my support. And when he married Tessa, I opened my arms and made room for her too, even when it was clear she'd never do the same for me. The courtroom was silent. I could hear my own breath, feel the weight of every eye on me. This house, the one they tried to steal, it isn't just real estate. It's my life's work. It's where I buried my husband, where I watched my son take his first steps, where I have mourned, rejoiced, and aged with grace. My voice cracked slightly, but I didn't stop. It may not be perfect. I may not be perfect, but I earned that home. And I refused to have it stolen from me by someone who couldn't even look me in the eye and tell me the truth. Finally, I turned to the judge. I ask not out of revenge, but out of justice. Let me keep what's mine. I walked back to my seat. Logan nodded once. Silent approval. The judge leaned forward, fingers laced. "I've reviewed all documents, testimonies, and the behavior of both parties. It is clear to me that an attempt was made to override Mrs. Whitaker's legal autonomy without consent. Therefore, I am ruling that all amendments made in favor of Mark Whitaker are null and void." Tessa stiffened beside Mark. Mark leaned forward, burying his face in his hands. The judge continued, "The original estate plan, excluding Mr. Whitaker as beneficiary, shall stand. The house at 14 Shoreline Drive shall remain fully in Mrs. Whitaker's name, and this court will not entertain further appeals from the defendants." A loud knock of the gavel echoed across the room. Court adjourned. I stood there as others bustled around me, papers shuffled, chairs scraped, people whispered. But I didn't move. I wasn't smiling. I wasn't celebrating. I was simply still, because it was done. They didn't win. I had reclaimed what was mine. In the days after the hearing, the house was quieter than ever. Not the comforting silence of familiarity, but the kind that settled heavy over your shoulders like a too-warm coat you didn't ask to wear. For the first time since the day I crossed out Mark's name in my will, I wasn't preparing for anything. No court dates, no filings, no sharp words rehearsed in the dark. I had won. And yet, it didn't feel like a victory. I didn't celebrate. There were no phone calls, no champagne, no triumphant music playing as I walked through the front door. I just came home. I hung up my coat. I fed the cats. I put on the kettle and sat at the kitchen table, staring out the window at the sea as it breathed against the shoreline. I'd fought for the house, yes. But more than that, I had fought for my voice, for my right to matter, and I'd reclaimed it. But no judge could give back what I had truly lost. My son, Mark. It felt strange, even saying his name aloud. For weeks there was nothing. No texts, no missed calls, no knocks at the door. Just the gentle rhythm of tides and the quiet hum of routines. And while part of me was relieved not to have to defend myself anymore, another part waited, stubborn, aching, for something. I wasn't sure would ever come. An apology, a beginning, something. I cleaned the house more than usual. Not out of need, but out of habit. Dusting shelves that didn't need dusting. Rearranging books I'd already arranged last month. The only things untouched were the piano and the photograph on the mantel. Walter, barefoot and grinning, standing in front of this house like it was the best thing he'd ever built. Maybe it was. One afternoon, Irene dropped by with a lemon, tart and a familiar look of concern behind her bright smile. "You holding up?" she asked. "I'm managing," I said. It was true, and not. She stayed for tea. We talked about the town gossip, about a new bakery opening by the post office. But even as we laughed and sipped, I knew she could see it. The weariness in my eyes, the heaviness in my chest. She didn't push, just hugged me tightly before she left. "You did what you had to do, Helen, and I'm proud of you," she said. "But don't let this house become a monument to pain. Let it be your home again." That night, I sat by the fire and stared at the logs as they cracked and glowed. The cats curled beside me, purring softly. The house, it seemed, had begun to forgive me. But I hadn't yet forgiven myself. Not fully. Then, 2 weeks later, my phone rang. It was nearly dusk, the sky painted in strokes of lavender and orange when I saw the name flash on the screen. Mark. I let it ring twice before answering. "Hello?" There was a pause, and then his voice, smaller than I remembered. "Hi, Mom." It knocked the breath out of me, not because I didn't expect it, but because part of me had given up hope it would ever come. "I'm here," I said, carefully, not warmly, not coldly, just here. "I've been thinking a lot," he began, "about everything, about what I did, what I let happen." Silence stretched between us, not hostile but fragile. "I know it's probably too late," he continued, "but I just wanted to say I'm sorry. Not just for the will, for all of it. For letting Tessa speak for me, for staying silent, for forgetting who raised me." The words didn't rush out of him. They came slow, uneven, like he was still trying to understand them himself. "I appreciate that," I said, my voice thick. "It doesn't undo what's happened, Mark, but it means something that you're saying it now. I'd like to talk more," he said, "if you're willing." I paused. I thought of the courtroom, of the silence that followed, of the little boy who used to build sandcastles at my feet, asking me if the waves would take them away. "One conversation," I said. "That's where we start." He agreed. Over the next few weeks, we spoke. Not often, not deeply at first. Small things, how the garden was doing, whether the roof held up through the last storm, how he remembered the squeak of the floorboard near the stairs and how he used to jump over it so he wouldn't wake us sneaking in late. The past hung between us like a curtain, thin, transparent, impossible to ignore. But neither of us tried to tear it down all at once. We just let the light in slowly. One Saturday morning he came to the house, alone. I watched from the porch as he stepped out of his car, uncertain and older than I remembered. Not in years, but in weight. The lines on his face weren't from time alone. They were from choices and consequences. In his hand, he held a small box. "I brought something," he said, holding it out. I opened it slowly. Inside was a necklace, a silver chain, with a pendant, a wave, curled and simple. "I saw it last week in a shop near the harbor," he said quietly. "Made me think of you, of this place, of what I nearly lost." I didn't speak. I just closed the box and nodded. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said. "But I want to rebuild, if you'll let me. I'm not sure I know how," I admitted. "But I'm willing to try." His shoulders dropped with a visible exhale. And for the first time in a long time, I saw my son, Not the man who sat silent in court, but the boy who used to leave me notes on the fridge, who used to hug me without needing a reason. He didn't stay long that day. Just long enough to walk the perimeter of the house with me, to point out the cracked paint on the east wall, and promise to come by with a brush next weekend. And he did. One coat of paint, one conversation, one quiet Saturday at a time. Weeks passed. The house grew warmer again, not just from spring creeping in, but from something deeper, the slow return of meaning. I started leaving the door open in the mornings, letting in the scent of salt and flowers. I began playing Walter's records again, not to remember him, but to feel him nearby. I never stopped missing what I lost. But I also stopped mourning it as if it could never change. Then one morning, as the sun broke over the bay, I took the necklace from the box and slipped it around my neck. It was light, gentle, unassuming, and yet it felt like armor. I stepped outside, wrapped in a shawl, and walked down the familiar path to the beach. The tide was low, revealing the mosaic of shells and driftwood scattered across the sand. The wind kissed my cheeks, crisp and salt-tinged, as I made my way to the edge of the water. I stood there a long while, toes in the cool sand, letting the waves inch closer with each breath. I didn't think about the court. I didn't think about the documents or the years of hurt or the words I couldn't take back. I just stood with the wind in my hair, the pendant warm against my skin, and let it all go. The sea didn't ask me to explain. It just welcomed me home, whole, and finally, free.